Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of AP Gov lecture series. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last time, and we're going to start with a discussion with these linkage institutions. Now, remember what I said last time. The linkage institution are these things that link us to our government, and the ones that we're going to talk about are political parties, interest groups, mass media, and elections. All of these things are what we as American citizens we have access to, we can use to link us to our government. That's what we're talking about with linkage institutions. And the one we're going to start with today are political parties. Now, we've already gone through the unit when we discussed the differences between liberal and conservative. This is just kind of a continuation on that discussion, but there is a difference because when we're talking about political parties, it's more than just liberal versus conservative, even though that's what you hear all the time in the media. If you're a liberal, you must be a Democrat. If you're conservative, you must be a Republican. But we had, an example today of voting in Congress where you had a conservative Democrat, almost derail a Democratic, piece of legislation. So it isn't that simple. And so we're going to go through all of the, these little, innuendos of attacks on the left and attacks on the right. And what does it really mean to be, a member of a political party? So we're going to start with the boring textbook definition that we always start with. Basically, what is a political party? It's a group of political activists who organize to win elections. That's key. Operate the government and determine public policy. So, these are the things. Obviously, if you don't win, you're not going to be able to operate the government. Here we're talking about if you're in the majority, right? You get to operate. And then determine public policy. So those are, that's what Congress does. You win elections to be able to get the public policies that you feel are best for the American people. So the functions, I'm going to zip through these really quick because they're kind of self-explanatory. So what do these political parties do? Well, obviously, they have to educate the voters. And you see this all over the place. Whenever they give a speech, whenever they, mail out flyers, whenever they're, being interviewed on the news, they are basically telling people, this is what we stand for, and you would do well to get behind us, and both parties do this. Obviously, they recruit candidates. They want to recruit candidates that can win, candidates that have, possibly already have a high profile. Because if you don't win, you cannot operate government, right? Plain and simple. And, when we did that unit over Congress, right, we talked about committees. Well, all of that leadership structure, if you don't win and if you don't hold the majority, you can't get committee chairs. You can't, have the majority on these committees. So, that leadership component is crucial to political parties and what they do. Obviously, they campaign, they fundraise, they come with a media strategy because they want to win. We'll talk more about this as we go through. That's a couple other linkage institutions that we'll talk about. And of course, they write the party platform. Now, the party platform is every 4 years during a presidential election year, they will write up, this is what our party stands for. With conservatives, it's going to be about tax cuts and smaller government. With Democrats, it's going to be about helping out the common man and having programs that will help lift people out of poverty and those types of things that are in their platform. So those are kind of the functions. Really self-explanatory. But I want to go back just briefly and remind you of the ideas of what people think of when they think of these political parties. First thing they think of, obviously, is which way people lean. You've got, socioeconomic status, level of education, race, gender, employment, where they live, urban versus rural, and all the things that go along with liberals and conservatives. We also can, kind of apply party to that because they are linked. So you remember that, we went through that in the past unit. If you need a refresher on that, go back and watch that video on political socialization. It's available for you guys. And then, of course, we looked at, this two-dimensional political spectrum, why the further right you go, the more conservative you become, the further left you go, the more liberal you become. And this idea that this may not be the best way to describe political parties today and people that belong to political parties. So basically, in this graph, and we'll go back to this one, because we added a box to this, right? Is it about control, right? Less control versus more control, more control of society, social norms. Republicans tend to be high on that, but less control when it comes to the economy. Let the economy run itself. Democrats, on the other hand, want less control of society. You do what you want to do, but more control of the economy. Have policies in place that will help people, economically. So that is another way to look at parties. When we get to the end of this, what we're going to do is we're going to have a day where we're going to look at some of these political party quizzes. One of the quizzes is the Nolan chart. And you'll answer a series of questions, and I'm going to put you on this table. And we have to add this right here, this centrist, right? And I will, let you know that most people, when they, when they're asked, are you a liberal, or are you a conservative, or are you a Republican, or are you a Democrat? Almost everybody says, well, I'm a moderate. And they all say that. But not everybody can be a moderate. If everybody were moderate, we'd all agree on everything. So, little, hesitation when somebody says, well, I'm in the middle. Usually, no. You're going to lean right or you're going to lean left. And these are some of these quizzes that we take. Going to kind of point that out, kind of which side do you lean to. So, but both political parties, having said that they, everybody thinks that they're in the middle, obviously that can't be possible. So the term we use is Big Tent. The Democratic Party, the Republican Party think of themselves as a big tent party. Not everybody is going to agree with everything of the political party they belong to. This is an example of some of the terms that we use to describe Democrats. And you've got the Reagan Democrats, Congressional Black Caucus. They're Democrats, but they have a different idea than the Reagan Democrats do. The Blue Dogs, these are fiscally conservative Democrats, as opposed to the progressives, which is they're not conservative economically. So, but they're all Democrats, and so what political parties need to do is to get as many different people in their tent as they can to vote for their party. That way they can win. But just because, when someone labels themselves a Democrat or labels themselves as a Republican, doesn't mean they always agree on everything. It's something important to keep in mind. Because if we look at the trends, what we've been, and this is by age group. So you think about, the silent generation, that's that World War II generation. And then, the baby boomers were born after World War II, Gen X, millennials, and then you guys, whatever, we're going to call you Gen Z or whatever. But what we've noticed over time is more and more people consider themselves an independent as opposed to a member of a political party. So, and we've talked about this before. So if I'm a political party, if I'm leadership in one of these parties, I'm looking at this data thinking, what is it we're doing that is causing our membership to go down and people to become more independent? And they're going to have to grapple with this. They're going to have to deal with this because the trend right now is, they are losing a hold on the American electorate. So those are just kind of some of the numbers that are fun to look at. So looking at this idea of, a Republican versus a Democrat and what that is. Historically, we go back, and you guys know this, that, we've gone through, these phases in American history where, one party's in power for a while, another party's comes into power, and they come and go. So, the question that I have to raise is, if you think about, the Democratic Party, are Jackson, FDR, Clinton, and Obama all the same because they're all Democrats? And obviously, the answer is no. And that is because of this thing we called party realignment. And that's a key vocab term that you guys need to know. And basically what realignment is when a party basically switches, when people switch parties. Usually when it happens is we can hindsight's 20/20, and we can look back and pinpoint exactly what happened in an election that caused a realignment. That's called the critical election theory. And I'm gonna give you some examples of this. Some people, and I'll end with this question, are we in another realignment? Well, we won't know if we're in a realignment until, things change and we can look back and say, okay, that's what did it. So what is a realignment? It's usually, when a party's been in control and they've been dominant for a long time, something happens, right? Some earth-shattering, there'll be a crisis or, something that will, bring attention to a cause where it becomes the dominant thing in political thought, and then large numbers will shift because of that crisis. So that's the critical election theory. So just a few examples. If you go back to the beginning, really the first era that we had of parties was from 1800 roughly to 1824. Now in 1800, Thomas Jefferson was elected president, and he was the party was the Jeffersonian Republicans or the Democratic Republicans. Well, that was the forerunner of the Democratic Party, which is why I have that in blue. So from 1800 to 1824, you had a series of Democratic Republicans went opposite. You had Jefferson, you had Madison, you had Monroe, and on. And so by 1824, it's going to change. Hamilton and the capitalist versus Jefferson, and this idea of a farm community, the agrarian community, that becomes the divide. So it wasn't really the divide that we have today of Republican versus Democrat, because they weren't the same as they are today. But the first party was the Democratic Party. By 1826, what you have is a fight among the Democrats. The Hamiltonian Federalists kind of die out because, this idea of the Federalists of a strong central government, at the expense of the states kind of goes away. So the Jeffersonian Republicans, which is states' rights essentially, kind of moves to the forefront. But then you have, Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams fighting over. They're both Democrats, and so you have these elections that go on. Well, anyway, by 1828, Andrew Jackson is elected president, and the Whig Party then replaces that vacuum left by the Federalist Party that died out. So you have the Whigs, and this goes on. And what happens is the Jacksonian Democrats, basically, it's Westerners, it's Southerners, poor whites. The Whigs typically tend to be, associated with the industrial North and the moneyed elites of the East Coast. And so here we have the two, different sides, kind of developing almost kind of the way they are looked at today. So that's and so remember these these groups, because it's going to come in. It's going to come up here in a little bit. In 1860, obviously, talk about a critical election. You guys know what happens in 1860. Civil War breaks out, and what you have is this new Republican Party, because the Whigs are going to die out because they really didn't take a stand on the important issue of the day. And in 1860, it was slavery. And the Republicans came out as the political party that was against slavery, that wanted to end this institution. The Whigs didn't take a stand, so they kind of go away. So the Republicans then are able to beat the Democrats, in this election, and so the Whigs go away, Republicans emerge. So now that's a shift. You have these people that will join the Republican Party because they are the party of anti-slavery. Now. This goes on. Obviously, you have Reconstruction from the end of the Civil War to 1896. Now, we're going to have another critical election in 1896. We're going to see a shift. And basically what happens is, because Reconstruction comes to an end, 1876, then, what does the Republican Party stand for if Reconstruction is over and slavery is over? So what do? They have to come up with something new. Well, you have essentially what you have is a huge recession in the economy. And by 1896, this has become a big enough deal that it's not about slavery reconstruction anymore. It's about the economy. And in 1896, we have, the emergence of, the Democratic Party, kind of reemerging and coming into being on this stance of free silver. And, because we'd been on the gold standard. We'd been on a bimetal system for a long time, but in 1870, I think, they did away with silver and went strictly to the gold standard. Well, the problem with that is gold, obviously, per ounce is more expensive than silver. Well, the Democrats and, their candidate, William Jennings Bryan, what they wanted to do was reintroduce silver back into the market to be able to pay, debts off with. And since silver is cheaper, the idea here, and we're not going to get too much into the weeds of the economic theory, but basically, since silver is cheaper, they were going to flood the market with silver and basically cause inflation. Now, most of the time when you think about inflation, it's probably not a good idea, because you see a rise in the increase of prices and things, the cost of things will go up. But this was going to be done on purpose, because the idea was, by flooding the market with silver causes inflation, goods will go up, specifically farming, right? So you've got agricultural goods. It's going to make crops more expensive because you have inflation. That's going to help the farmer. And you also have the Westerner, right, who's trying to make a living on the prairie and all these things. So this idea of free silver really solidified the Democrats, again, as the party of farming and, people that work. And then you have, the Republicans kind of turn to this idea of the industrial elite, Northeast, bankers, those types of people. So you have a switch from the Republicans of Reconstruction to the Republicans of this idea of economic dominance by the wealthy. And that's going to happen. Now, one thing that I will tell you is this is anecdotal, and it's, is it true? We don't know. But if you think about, all of this that happened with silver and gold and kind of what they're going through, there was a book written about this time later in the 1930s. It's going to be made into a movie called The Wizard of Oz. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, there are theories out there. But if you think about The Wizard of Oz, the movie, and Dorothy, right? And Dorothy's born on a farm in Kansas. And, she gets sucked up by a tornado and she's transported to the land of Oz. And there she meets, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion, and they have to go to talk to the wizard about getting back to Kansas. Well, a lot of people think that that book is an allegory for the situation that was going on with the economy at that time. So if you think about, Dorothy being the common man, and in the book, by the way, her silvers are not ruby. That's just the movie because they had color at that point. So, but in the book by L. Frank Baum, she wore silver slippers, free silver. And she walked on the yellow brick road, which represented gold. All right, so you've got this silver gold thing going on. So to get to Oz, she has to do both. She has to, silver and gold both get her to Oz. So that's kind of that allegory. And then you think about the Scarecrow. The Scarecrow represents the Western farmer, right? Head full of straw, doesn't understand banking. He's just on his own. But it turns out that he actually does understand all this stuff. The Tin Man represents labor and the industrial, rust belt. And so, L. Frank Baum and the allegory, that they push basically is that, that farmers, Western farmers, and the labor of the industrial Midwest were going to join forces and catapult the Democratic Party in this idea of free silver. To cause inflation, to let the little guy, right, make more money and those types of things, and so the banking industry of the Northeast wasn't going to happen, and so obviously the wizard, right, he is, and if you look at Oz, it's all green, it's about money, it's the banking industry, so basically you have the common man and Dorothy, and the farmers confront this idea of this economic inequality. So if we get free silver, right, then this will solve the problem, and you'll be able to take on the banking, the interests of the banking elite. Now, is it allegory? I don't know, but it's a fascinating look at it. But if you think about that story, and did L. Frank Baum mean to be talking about this idea of free silver and what was going on in 1896 when he wrote this book, because it came out in early 1900s? We don't know. But what I do know is if you think about gold and silver, and you measure gold and silver, it is measured in ounces, okay? And so an ounce of gold was worth roughly 16 ounces of silver. And that's kind of what they wanted. And what is the abbreviation for ounce? Well, if we go to the All Acronyms webpage, the abbreviation for ounce is OZ. Mind blown, right? But anyway, that's fun. And I love telling that story. And it's kind of a cool story, but yes, The Wizard of Oz, is it based on this? Who knows? Anyway, back to reality, what we're doing here. So you have these, the Republicans still in charge because William Jennings Bryan, the Democrat, lost the election of 1896. Democrats weren't really able to gain control of the government again until 1932. Obviously, you know what's going on here. What is the, catastrophic election, the critical election that happens? Well, obviously what's going on is the Great Depression. And how, FDR, stepped up and said, this is how we're going to handle the Great Depression. The Democrats won. Not only did they win the White House, they won both houses of Congress. Hoover was the last president until Trump in 2020 that lost both the White House, the House, and the Senate all in the same election. So, that ushered in this new era of Democratic, rule, essentially, because of the coalition that happened. Now, once we were out of the Great Depression, you have a change, and by 1968, you've got Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon. And it's been different kind of ever since because we really haven't had a dominant party since 1968. So we call this the era of divided government because we really haven't seen dominance by one party for any length of time. We've had more split decisions. So it goes Republican to Democrat, back to Republican, back to Democrat, more than any other time in our history in the last 30 years. So 40 years. So that's kind of what we're looking at now. So what does this mean, this critical election theory? Well, you have these earthquake events that happen. Obviously the Civil War was one, Great Depression was one. How does this work? Well, let me kind of walk you through how this works with the Great Depression. In 1929, obviously you had the stock market crash. What was going on at that point, was this idea of this second Republican rule after the financial crisis of 1896. And African Americans were Republicans because Lincoln was a Republican and he freed the slaves. So, newly freed blacks in the South flocked to the Republican Party because Lincoln freed the slaves. And they were staunch Republicans. Well, what happens as a result of this election, it becomes more about economics. And FDR then, when he comes in, puts all these programs that benefit the poor. And if you think about African Americans, at the time, they were poor. So to get these people out of this economic depression, you see a shift. So most African Americans shift from the Republican Party to vote Democrat. And they've been there ever since. And so this is this idea. And so I want you to make sure you guys understand when you hear politicians say, well, Lincoln was a Republican, he freed the slaves, therefore African Americans are Republicans. Understand what happened in 1932. They switched because of what happened during the Great Depression. And since that, as time has gone on, and what happened as a result of 32, they won both the House and the Senate. It's going to change, and we've started to see some change. Obviously, with the 2020 election, whether we're talking about blacks or Hispanics or Asian, all these different, subgroups that we look at, it's not guaranteed anymore, right? Because we saw in 2020 where, the Republicans did win a lot of votes. And so are we going to experience another realigning election? What's going to be the critical election theory? What's going to be, the chaos that causes, another switch? I don't know if it's going to or not, but it's kind of fun to think about. So what about then this idea that people are leaving parties and becoming independent? What about a third party? We talk about third parties, but, why is it the Republicans and Democrats are losing strength? And we look at this, and one of the things, obviously, as the number of independents go up, I think, this idea that these parties are closed. A lot of the primaries and caucuses that we have early in the election series to pick the candidates are what we call closed primaries, which means you have to be registered in that party to vote. And again, this is me. What I think happens as a result of that, if a Republican primary is only open to registered Republicans, those are going to be people that vote for somebody who's much further right than an independent would be. Same way with the Democrats. A closed primary with the Democratic Party, you're going to get the far left people that go to these, and they're going to pick a far left candidate. That is causing people, once these candidates finally get there, they're like, I don't like either one of them. I'm going to be an independent because they have moved further right and further left. Probably not very good. So that becomes an issue. Interest group pressure. Oh my gosh. All the things that we hear about, from big oil to big pharma to the education unit to labor unions, all of these interest groups that are putting pressure on the political parties. And, it does appear sometimes that they are caving to these groups. So, how much power do these interest groups have? Think Madison and Federalist Number 10, right? Factions. Are we living in an age of, this idea of pluralism, or is it elitism? We have to step back and take a look at that, and we'll revisit that as well. This idea of ticket splitting. When somebody goes into to vote in the general election, we see a lot more people voting for maybe a Republican for governor, but a Democrat for the House, or a Republican for president, or a Democrat in the state legislature. So that's called ticket splitting, and we do see kind of an increase in that when people are voting for the person, not the party. Parties don't like that. They want you to vote straight party line, and they do things to try to get that to happen. Party discipline and party schisms. We've seen this right now. Probably the best example is that we have. We talked about this in class. Where is the Republican Party going? Is it going to be the party of Trump? Or is it going to be the more moderate, Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney type party? Same with the Democrats. Is it going to be, the far left with Bernie and AOC, or is it going to be the more moderate, Joe Biden? So we don't know. But the more, they separate themselves, the more problems they're going to have. It's going to make it even harder to come together. And then, of course, you bring in voters that just are apathetic, right? It's like, oh, you guys don't do anything for us. And, say what you will about Donald Trump. He tapped into this. Obviously, those people I don't like the fact that he pitted people against each other, but it was a great message for people that were like, they don't listen to me anyway, so I might as well vote for somebody who's going to stir it up. Genius. And so, that's, the more apathy and cynicism there is out there, the less strength the parties are going to have over the people. So what we have seen over time then is an increase in polarization. And polarization is this idea that the two sides are moving further and further apart. I'll shoot this website to you guys in a text or in an email. But basically what we've seen, go from 1994, 04, 2014, and then to 2020, these groups are drifting further and further apart. So you take the most moderate Democrat and the most liberal Republican, and you're kind of looking at kind of where they are, and they're moving apart. So the left is becoming more liberal, the right is becoming more conservative, and now it's really kind of hard to get things done given those stances. So probably not a good idea that this is happening. So I guess enter third parties. Is there a chance for a third party to kind of step in and look at the people that are becoming independents, not really joining a party? There are several types that we can look at historically. We've always had them. Can one win? I don't know. I think the rules are kind of written against them. But there are all kinds. We have these splinter parties that are, that break off from one of the major parties. Probably the most famous is the Bull Moose Party or the Progressive Party with Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican and decided to step down, have his vice president run, Taft. Taft won. Roosevelt went away. Taft didn't do what Roosevelt wanted, so Roosevelt came back. But the Republicans nominated Taft again instead of Roosevelt. So Roosevelt split off from the Republican Party, ran his own campaign, which allowed Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, to win that election because he split the vote between Republicans. You have these ideological parties, the Green Party, Libertarian Party. They're based on an ideology of something, whether it be cleaning up the environment or smaller government or any one of those things can be an ideological party. Single issue parties, go back to the Civil War, the Free Soil Party. All they wanted was for slavery to end where it was and not allow it to spread. They weren't able to gain any traction. You have the Right to Life Party. They only have one issue, and that's abortion. A lot of these single issue parties really don't have a shot because you have to be a big tent party to win. Then you have these economic protest parties. The Greenback Party wanted to go to the paper dollar. The Populist Party, it's about taxes for, or for programs for the poor, tax the rich, blah, blah, blah. So those are kind of economic protest parties. And then you have personality, celebrity. Obviously, Donald Trump being the main person right here. I remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger ran for governor in California, his personality, and people always say, who would you vote for if they ran? And the same names always come up. You have, I'd vote for Oprah, or I'd vote for, right now, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is being talked about as a potential candidate. So, we do get those occasionally. And so what happens is, if there any success to these third parties, and Ross Perot, did a phenomenal job at getting a lot of people on his side. And we go back to the early and middle 90s when Ross Perot and his Reform Party, basically in 1992, was able to split the Republican vote because he got like 19% of the popular vote for his third party. But a lot of the people that were voted for the Reform Party normally would have voted for Republicans. And that allowed Bill Clinton to win the election, and so therefore, started, his run. But what happened was the Republicans, Ross Perot got almost 20% of the vote in 92. By 96, it was down to 10%, and then by 2000, it was less than 1%. The Republicans adopted what the Reform Party stood for. That's usually what happens with third parties. They're kind of swallowed up. But they do serve a purpose. Everybody goes, well, if they can't win, what's the point? Well, we think about this idea of a safety valve. And, if all you have are Republicans and Democrats, and you don't like either one of them, and you get frustrated, you have to have an outlet. We have to have, something else to choose from. That's when those third parties step in. And you may think as you're voting for the Libertarian Party or the Green Party that they don't have a chance of winning, but by golly, I feel good about my vote because I don't like either of the other two parties, so it's almost like a protest vote. And it does kind of relieve a little bit of that pressure, on American democracy by giving you an outlet to vote for somebody as opposed to being, stuck in that. So What have third parties done historically? Obviously, I referenced the Progressive Party, the Bull Moose Party with Teddy Roosevelt. He was able to split the Republican Party, right? And that allowed Woodrow Wilson, with less than a majority of the popular vote, to win a majority of the Electoral College, becomes president. What would World War I have been like had Teddy Roosevelt been president? It would have been different, I guarantee you. Then we go to 1992. Obviously, Ross Perot took about 20% away from the Republican incumbent Bush, allowed Clinton to win. And then in 2000, the Green Party, Ralph Nader ran on the Green Party and was able to siphon away enough votes from Al Gore in Florida to flip Florida from blue to red, which allowed George W. Bush to win in 2000. Again, we think about, what would, 9/11 and the terrorist attacks, what would it have been like had Al Gore been president instead of George W. Bush? We don't know, but it would have been different. I can guarantee that it would have been different. So, these are things, third parties do play a role. They've played the role of spoiler before. So we have to pay attention to them. Not that they're going to, win everything anytime soon, but that's what we have to do. So to wrap this up, with political parties, there's more to it, I think, than what you just see on the news. So if all you watch, is your particular media channel, we'll talk about media here, later in the week, you're only going to get one side of the story. That's why I always tell you guys to branch out and listen to both sides. Listen to the independents. Listen to, people that may not have an agenda to get the full picture, because that's kind of where we're at right now. And that's, of course, my opinion. The left is moving further left. The right is moving further right. Not quite sure that's going to be good for the country. So that's my soapbox for the day. But anyway, so parties, if you guys have questions about parties, obviously, you can shoot them my way. We're going to pick up the next thing. It's going to be interest groups. So we're going to fill in that third little leg of the iron triangle. But again, if you have any questions about political parties, shoot them my way. I'll be happy to answer those. And until next time, we'll see you.